Ta-da. All right. Hi, boys.
Hey.
All right. It's going to be a different kind of night. Look, normally it's Rob, Sarah, Stacey, but I've got a million things going on. Sarah does as well. So tonight, I think we've paired up a couple of brilliant. I know we've paired up a couple of brilliant people that I thoroughly enjoy watching, and I think you're both pretty damn incredible. So here we are. I'm going to duck out of here in just a minute, but I'll come back, Stacey. I'm not going to leave you. And I know Greg can't stay the entire time, but I'll be back.
Well, how long is the entire time? Is it because I can stay?
An hour.
I can stay an hour.
You can stay an hour.
I can stay an hour. Can I just say before you leave though that even the countdown music was just like blowing me away. I just like it's like what is it? I mean, it's like okay, I get it. You were counting down. There's 15 seconds left. Like, jeez.
Everything I do, Greg, I do with vigor.
There's a lot of vigor there.
There's vigor. There's enthusiasm. Yeah, look, I don't know why I made it a minute. I always felt like 30 seconds was too short, but now a minute feels way too long.
In a way, I didn't want it to end. It was just so epic.
Well, I've
never seen an epic countdown like that before. So
yeah, it's one of my favorites. Before I jump off, we will say hello to everybody. I'm gonna let you two listen. Greg, I listen to your shows. I watch your shows whenever I can. If you don't know, Greg Bakun's on at it's 11:05, right? 11:05 Eastern.
Eastern, yep.
He's on at 11:05 p.m. Eastern. It's just about when I crawl into my cocoon. But his shows are incredible. He has incredible guests. He's just a great interviewer. And then we have Stacey Talich, who you two are just meeting each other for the first time tonight. Who's also someone that I can sit and listen to forever. Stacey, the whole story how I met Stacey is pretty crazy, but he's an amazing instructor on Udemy. He's a vast encyclopedia of knowledge when it comes to all things paranormal. So I'm excited to come back and watch this later. But I will stop back in at the end. But let's say hello to everybody before I run away. We've got Kimberly Arnold Billups. We've got Big Daddy Andy. He's an official cult member as well. We have Court Peterson, sharer and program manager of the Paranormal Podcast Program Extraordinaire. We have Adam, another cult member. He's a level 2. He's very proud of that. We have Sarah agreeing with my perfect pairing comment. Who else am I missing? There's some quiet people on the side. You've got a bunch of people watching, but nobody wants to identify themselves. That's okay. Court saying hello to both of you. What's your topic tonight, Stace?
We're going to be talking about mediumship, the course that I have on the Dead, the beginner's course. So we're going to get into the whole idea. It's basically the opposite of remote viewing, where we try and purge AOLs and remote viewing. In mediumship, you actually embrace it. So
okay. All right. Well, it's going to be an amazing show. If anybody's bad on the side, just boot them off, but we'll keep watching. We got moderators over there. I'm going to duck out for a little while. I got to go help the boys with Nesper to make sure they're ready to rock and roll tonight. And then I'll be back to check on things. Perfect. I won't bust in though. So with that, everybody, ask questions, be involved, and enjoy.
Excellent.
The Ask Show. Ask Stacey Stuff. All right, I'm out. I'll be back.
Alrighty. See you in a bit.
All right. So what we're talking about tonight is like Professor Stacey said, we're talking about mediumship. One of the things too that we kind of, I think, if you're fine with Stacey, is kind of point people towards the Udemy courses that you are teaching, and we're looking at, correct me if I'm wrong, the Talking Dead Basics of Spirit Communication course, correct?
That is correct. The course itself is covering the basics of not only just mediumship, but your understanding your senses of itself. A lot of times people, whenever they think mediumship is one of these things that is a special gift that you're born with. Everybody has it. It is a matter of simply paying attention to the things that you're receiving, the data that you're getting, because all of our life we've been trained to ignore the vast majority of information that comes into our brain.
Well, and I was going to ask you about that because we were talking about this off air beforehand a little bit. And, you know, one of the things that I think that is very prevalent is that children do have this ability. Like for a lot of them, they're coming up and they're talking about it without even knowing what it is. And we as adults or parents often are trying to discourage this because we don't understand, right?
Right. The imaginary friend.
Exactly.
It's a phase, they'll grow out of it, but what we really don't understand or we neglect is that we subtly discourage the imaginary friend. And after a while, and it's not just parents, it's other adults and even their peers, because eventually you understand there is no Santa Claus. And kids are vicious when it comes to not being able to see and participate in something that you may actually see dead people. Children will just be savage in discouraging that kind of thing. And eventually your brain will just ignore it because there's incentive to.
Now, did you have this gift? I mean, we all have it since we're children, but was it available to you your whole life? Yeah,
on certain levels. The thing that I had when I was really younger was deja vu, meaning some people, when they experience deja vu, it is a sense that they just have a feeling they've done this before kind of thing. Well, mine were actually precognitive. I would remember the moment I had the dream that I was in that situation. So it was a flashback of the dream that I was having when I sensed the deja vu. It was more intense on that level. I had that ever since I could remember. Out-of-body experiences and things of that kind.
Absolutely. Now, is that something too, where are those like longer scopes? And my experience with deja vu has always been kind of like fleeting moments, right? Where it's just like, oh gosh, I've been here before. Something about this is familiar. Where I think it sounds to me that what you're doing, you can pinpoint it more like accurately to something little bit larger.
Right. I would actually have a dream that in the dream state, I was very confused. And I was in a scenario or a situation that absolutely made no sense whatsoever. It was, I mean, dreams can be weird, but these were really vivid things that you do in life. It wasn't like a bunny was, playing catch with a baseball or something like that. There was no symbolism involved. It was just, I was in a really weird place doing something that is just out of the norm. And that would be weeks or months later, I would actually be there doing that sort of thing. And I would remember the moment I had the dream of being there. I'm like, oh, that's what that was. It's sort of like seeing bits of a movie without seeing the beginning or the ending. And all of a sudden you got that clip. And that was my deja vu. It was crazy.
Did you at one point kind of pick up on this then, and you're like, I'm going to start writing down some of these dreams and correlate them back to when you'd have these deja vu moments?
Yeah, I did for a little bit, but I got to tell you, I was incredibly lazy with it, only because when you first wake up, the last thing you want to do is write something. I did it with a recorder for a little bit, and then after a while, but what it did was gave me an opportunity to investigate this stuff further. Is this normal and nobody talks about it? Is this something special? Am I gifted? That kind of thing. And what I found out is that everybody has this to a certain degree. They just don't pay attention to it.
We are talking tonight about the basics of spirit communication. We are talking about mediumship with Professor Stacey, and we are looking at I'm looking at, quite frankly, the course, the Udemy course that is available for this, that he offers. Courtney has put that link into the comment section if you want to check it out as well. One of the things that I get really frustrated about, and before I go further, folks, please put your questions in the comments, and I'm going to get to those momentarily. One of the things I get frustrated about when I'm on paranormal investigations are paranormal investigators who tell me, and I always feel like they wear this as a badge of honor when they say, I don't have an intuitive bone in my body. And it's one of the things that really frustrates me because, like we're talking about, that is something that happens that is with all of us. But I feel like that there are people who don't want to explore that side of things.
Well, yeah. And I like to call bullshit on that too, because everybody's got it. And I say that very generally, everybody's got it, because there was a survey done that they just recently found out that a certain percentage of the population has no internal voice. They're basically NPCs. They literally walk through life not thinking of anything, and the moment they think of something, it falls out their face. There are those people, but being intuitive really is a matter of having that internal dialogue and internal perspective of what you're thinking while you're thinking it. Sort of a third person kind of analysis on the fly, or retrospectively, I just said something stupid. I'm going to think about that for a minute. That kind of internal perspective is where intuitive, the voice actually comes from. It questions everything you do. It is the editor of your thoughts.
Absolutely. Well, and that's the thing. How many times do we don't listen to our intuition when we're not even necessarily correlating that always with mediumship or intuition, even for that matter, even though we use the term of like, something was telling me not to, put the pasta sauce near the edge of the counter, and I did, and it fell off and broke, and it's all over the place, something like that.
And the internal voice doesn't actually have to be a voice. I mean, yeah, we have that internal voice that we talk to ourselves, or is talking, just to hear something that we were thinking about before we say it. But the intuitive side is also the other senses. You can not just hear, you can see, smell, taste, and even feel different things like dread. You can feel awe. You can feel a little nervous, a cold chill going up your spine, different things like that. The prickling on your neck when you walk into a haunted location, you feel it immediately. These sensory things are all part of the intuitive process, and paying attention to it is what mediums really are. If you actually watch mediums, when they're at work, they use all of their five senses. They'll walk into a location, they're like, oh, my stomach, it feels like somebody's stabbing me, like right here. It's really like there's a knife and it's twisting, and they're describing the sensory of the data that they're getting. They're not actually getting stabbed. That's the information that is being transmitted to them by the dead. And it can be literal or it can be symbolic, because the dead don't communicate in words either. They communicate in ideas, feelings, emotions, things like that.
And that's an interesting thing. It's odd. I've been telling a couple people today that I've had this feeling of dread all day. When you have those feelings, how do you break it down to be able to try to figure out what that is, what that pure, that core of what that feeling comes from? Is there a simple way to try to get to that?
Well, there's a lot of different ways. Anybody who's a psychic will, when they get the feeling, they'll ferret out for verification, either through divination, tarot cards, things of that kind, or they will sit and meditate and actually allow that information to come through in a more blossoming picture. Automatic writing, even remote viewing, they'll allow that data to actually metastasize to where they can see where it's going and what it's about. And a lot of times the feelings of dread that people get, if you're just doing like normal stuff throughout your day, you're sitting at your computer and all of a sudden you get this wave of dread, it doesn't mean that there's a meteor that's going to fall out of the sky and crush you in your house. Usually what it means is you're you're actually connected to what I call the zeitgeist, the consciousness of all of humanity. We have a common consciousness that we all tap into. And things like war, terrorism, something that is going to affect us all on a visceral level, it will ripple through the zeitgeist before something happens, because our consciousness, and this has been studied by scientists at the Stargate program in the military, that zeitgeist is a good 72 hours ahead of us, meaning the timeline itself stretches. And our consciousness is essentially a time traveler, 72 hours in the future. And that zeitgeist is we're sensing something coming, because 72 hours from now, it's already happened. So,
wow. So possibly I should look out to see what something that might be, and it doesn't have to necessarily be, like you said, like something massive, but it's something that's in the consciousness, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I'd like to get to some of these comments here, since people have been kind enough to put them in. Courtney says that happens to me. I've gotten warnings and dreams, and there was a reason to it. I ignored it years ago. I should have listened more. And it's like, how many times do you, and I don't know if Courtney has done this, but I feel like there's a lot of times that I hear people say I should have heeded that warning, but yet we still don't. Like, it happens again and we still don't. And it's like I think there's some kind of conditioning or some sort of trying to kind of hone in to be better about that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, negative affirmation in our youth is very powerful. It's hard to get past it. It's almost like scar tissue. You have to work harder to get past the negative. Oh, that's silly. I don't. The fear of being a fool is huge for a lot of people, because our perception of how other people perceive us has a huge value on the way that we move through life. Once you get to a certain age, it doesn't matter anymore. For a lot of people, the whole idea of having zero fucks to give. Once you get to that point, it becomes a lot easier, because how other people see you and how people perceive you isn't as important, and they will actually pay attention to what you are doing. I stopped caring about that a long time ago, and just being my natural self, I started getting a reputation of being spooky, because I would do things, I would say things, and I would have the confidence saying this is what's going to happen. And people are like, what are you talking about? And then it would happen. I'm like, what are you going to do? And they're like, very spooky type stuff. In high school, I had the nickname of Radar, because I had the glasses, first of all.
Sure.
But I also had that spookiness about me. So, it's one of these things where if you don't really care what people think of you, you can accomplish a great deal more. Look at Elon Musk. He doesn't care what anybody thinks, and he's the world's richest man. Yeah. So
I think that's how you have to exist, isn't it? I mean, in general, you have to believe in what you're doing, and you have to go with it. You have to move forward with it. Otherwise, you're just going to be doing other people's work anyway.
Right. Well, that's a big thing on mediumship in of itself. Mediumship requires two very important aspects. One, you have to have a relationship with the dead itself. You can't just being a medium with no dead people talking to you. You're not really a medium. That requires a relationship similar to any other relationship you would have with the living. You have to be kind of a good person they want to communicate with. And number two is owning it, because owning it is that aspect internally that allows you to pay attention to these things, because that's you. It's part of your identity. And a lot of people can't get to that second point, which is owning it. Part of that is imposter syndrome. People don't want to, make people think that, oh, you're a medium, you must be able to do all this kind of stuff. when actually you're at the whim of whenever the dead talk to you.
Yeah.
You know, you can't summon them at the snap of a finger. They just, you know, they do their thing and you do your thing, and where you cross is where mediumship exists. But owning it is the key ingredient to allowing yourself to sense these things when it needs to be said and have an ethos behind it. So
I think that's too why, you know, like courses like yours on Udemy are important, because that you're going to run into a lot of people, and I've run into them through my journey in this field, of people who don't know what to do with it. They don't know what to do with like newfound gifts, or that it's been with them their whole life. And the idea to be able to kind of get some sort of idea of what that grounding can be like, what can it be like to know that you are not alone. This is important stuff. And like you said, some people don't get to the next level, and sometimes you have to be able to, you can't do it all on your own. You have to do stuff like take your courses or find someone to help you get to there, because it's actually could be for your own mental health as well.
Yeah, well, why try and reinvent the wheel? You know, just
Totally.
because you've got this new thing that you're playing with, it doesn't mean that other people haven't been there before and actually have shortcuts or tricks or ideas to help you move forward at a much more rapid pace.
Mm-hmm.
We're all here to help each other. Doing it solo, and I get it, in the beginning you're kind of like, might be a little weirded out. You don't want to let people know that you've got this going on because they might think you're crazy, different things of that sort. I get that. But there comes a point where you have to have a mentor, and that's a lot of things in life.
Yeah.
You know, people who are successful in business didn't invent the wheel themselves. They followed the path of those before them, and they improved upon it, worked harder at it, and they became wealthy in that process. Mediumship is the same way. There are a lot of people who are genuine in their efforts, genuine in their knowledge, and you work with them, and they'll be happy to work with you too, because they were the same way once. You know, they started out just like everybody else, not knowing anything about anything.
No.
And passing that on is, you know, part of the journey.
I really like the idea, excuse me, of mentorship when it comes to that, because it's very necessary to be able to do that. I've seen so many people suffer, and so many people being stubborn about it too. Sarah asked the question, just curious, is that okay to talk to people in my dreams?
Oh yeah. You know, because you may not actually be in a dream. You
True.
may actually be someplace. You know, you talk to them, find out as much information as you can. You know, if you're lucid enough to understand that you're in a dream, you really might not be in a dream. That's the lucid dreaming aspect of leaving your body or being in a precognitive state. You can gather information and bring it back to yourself. So you may be in a dream, but like I said, if you're cognizant enough to know that that's what's going on, it may not actually be. So
I've had a situation many, many years ago after my father had passed, about a year after he passed, because he kept appearing in my dreams. And finally, and every time I'd get near him, he'd disappear, which I don't think that's him as a spirit per se. I think that's more of my own mind playing. But then he was in a dream. Then he was much younger. That, like, when I saw him more vibrant and alive than near death. And I stopped the dream in a sense where I realized that I'm in a dream, and I said, "Wait a minute, you're dead," and he disappeared. And I told him, "You come back here right now," and he came back. And I told him how much I loved and cared for him, and that's those. There are amazing. That was a lucid dream. That was where I knew where I was. I was familiar with my surroundings. And I guess, I mean, I never really think of it this way, but dreams like that's mediumship as well, right? I mean, it's talking to the dead. That's what that's all about.
Exactly. That's a perfect of what mediumship, and that's you not even trying. That was just your natural state, your natural being doing what it should be doing when your mind, your conscious mind, is not getting in the way.
Right.
Which is the problem. We are our worst enemies our own worst enemies when it comes to doing this sort of stuff, because our conscious mind is there to protect us for all intents and purposes, but it's more of a hindrance when it comes to pulling down real information from within the universe. So.
Absolutely. Doreen has a comment. She said, recently had a feeling of dread while getting ready to go out. Nearly 12 hours later, something happened in my life that impacted me greatly, and I will not forget. She goes on to say, I explained it to my husband as if we're going to drive a distance, I would tell you, no, we're staying home. So, I mean, it is something that, and that helps me. Well, I mean, it makes me feel more dread, I guess. But it's like, oh, great, what's happening in 12 hours? But it is important to listen to that, and I appreciate Doreen putting that in there for us.
Yeah, paying attention to it and remembering that what you felt and then the actual result, that's actually positive affirmation. That's a learning experience that we create neural pathways in order to move forward in understanding the next time it happens, that's something to pay attention to. That's a red flag. We post those red flags all throughout the day on everything that we do, and we don't even pay attention to it. But when we do pay attention and it is there, that is the next step to the evolution of more information coming. Because vocalizing it like she did, that actually is part of it. The dead listen to that. Whenever you get information from the dead, if you try and keep it internally and you're just like, well, I don't really know if I should say something. I'm not sure. I'll keep it to myself. They can't hear whether or not we're getting the information. They say something, we say it out loud. That is the connection. They make that connection that we heard them. So they give us more information, and it snowballs from there. So, but you have to make the effort of being a medium. Just you are the middle, being that instrument and putting out that information. If it's wrong, it's wrong. Who cares? But if it's right, that is where the dead actually start focusing, because they know they've hit the right frequency.
Yeah.
We all have our own frequencies. We all have our own brain patterns. We all have our own neural patterns that are different. Science has learned this with CAT scans and MRIs and things like that. Everybody's brain patterns are different. The dead try and communicate to us on that level, on our brain pattern. Once they've hit that magical combination, they keep hitting at it. And you have to say it out loud to let them know that they've actually accomplished their side of it.
I think it's very important how you said that it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to get it wrong, because I feel like that, and you touched on this a little bit earlier in the program. You kind of touched on the idea of like there is a unrealistic belief from skeptics in particular about what mediums can do, and they were looking for every sort of reason why to prove why mediumship doesn't exist. And so getting it wrong sometimes, depending on who you're around, they're going to be like, see, this is why it doesn't exist. Not realizing that how many times as just human beings we get something wrong every single day, and that's just the human experience. And it's so frustrating when you get people that are so like, oh, I guess that means that just goes to show that you're not real. Or if you get a traffic ticket and they're like, oh, I bet you didn't see that coming. That's sort of BS, it's ridiculous.
Right. Yeah. Just being a medium does not mean you're omniscient or omnipresent. The whole idea around skeptics too kind of irritates me, because that is a misuse of the word skeptic. More often than not, these skeptics aren't skeptic. They're cynics.
Yeah.
They don't believe in anything except their own magnificence.
Yeah.
Skeptics won't believe something until you prove it. Cynics will never believe it.
Yeah.
You have to understand the difference between the two. And when somebody is nothing but cynical about everything, don't pay them any attention. They're not worth it. Especially the ones that are like, do something for me, prove it. Like you're a dancing monkey. Well, we're not here to entertain you. We're here to give you information. If you take it, you take it. If you don't, you don't care. That's not my job. My job is to say it. You run with it. Don't run with it. I don't care.
Right.
So,
Right. I mean, you're not there to impress them. You're there to pass along information.
If they're not impressed with the information, that's their problem.
Right.
I'm just here to relay it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I mean, it's I don't know. It's really, it's really hard. Like Doreen said, trusting yourself. It's so difficult to do at times, but it's been proven to me that I need to trust me more. The intuition is stronger than I expected. I mean, I find it also interesting, and I'm curious. You had mentioned, like, when you get the information, you need to say it out loud. When you speak to spirit, can you just formulate it in your mind, or do you also say that out loud, like when you're trying to communicate? And if it's just for you, you don't have a client or anything, are you internalizing it and putting it out there, or do you say it out loud?
Well, I'll do both. Internalize it first, so I have my thoughts right. But then I'll say it out loud. Because not all spirits can hear me while I'm thinking, because we may not be in sync, but they can hear my voice.
Mm-hmm.
The vibration of sound against the air, they can, feel that. They can hear that. So even if I'm not, thinking on the level that I should be, because our thoughts range in frequency based off of whatever we're dealing with at the time. Whether it's we're in a very intense work scenario, we're driving down the road, we're watching TV, our brain waves are constantly shifting, and that frequency is constantly shifting.
Mm-hmm.
The dead can't hear all of that because they're not tuned into it at that level. If you say things out loud, they can hear it, and then you can kind of sync together after that.
I like the idea when you say that when you're saying it out loud, they know that frequency is working, that you are able, that it's almost like test, can you hear me? And you're saying, yes, I can. And that's a big, and I suppose that goes a long way for continuation of communication then, because they know, like, we know this works.
Yeah, well, that's a very ancient concept. Ever since Babylon, ancient Egypt, everything had to be said out loud.
Mm-hmm.
Praying silently was a new thing when monotheism came around. Before that, everything was conjured with the voice. Even in the Bible, the "Let there be light" was a voice.
Yeah.
Everything was sound. All of the hieroglyphs that were written in stone, they were breathed into life when those words were said out loud. There's where you actually get the phrase "the living word" is things that are said out loud. That concept is very, very ancient. With the tones, with your Tibetan Buddhism, the tones with the bells and the humming and the chants and all of these things, that vibration of the sound is what the other side, the dead and the gods, actually respond to. So.
It's safe to say, or correct me if I'm wrong, that the further we go down history, the further we actually move away as an overall society with the belief of speaking to the dead. It feels like to me. Is that somewhat accurate?
Yeah, and you're not wrong. The idea of the dead, because we had a shelf life of life of around 30 years old. Very rarely do people live past age 35. You got born, and then shortly thereafter, you were dead. The infant mortality rate, if you lived to the age of 6, you were one of the lucky ones. And then you lived for another, 20, 30 years, and then you were dead again.
Mm-hmm.
So death was always one of these things that was in everyone's life all of the time. So speaking with the dead was just as natural, if not more so, than the living.
Right.
The ancient Egyptians built an ancient culture for 1,000 years based off of the dead. worshiping ancestors and things of that kind.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's see here. D Hoot had said when you were talking about cynics, they asked if that's the same as being a narcissist.
Well, yeah. I mean, you have to have a certain level of narcissism in order to be a cynic, because you honestly believe that your farts don't stink and you know everything about everything and everyone else is a fool.
Mm.
It takes a certain level of narcissism in order to get to that level of self-worship.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't pay any attention to cynics simply because they offer nothing. No one's ever built a statue in the name of a cynic. So.
No, that's very true. And then he goes on to say, I tap into rage sometimes while driving when he's talking about his mediumship. I hear you loud and clear on that one. That one's easy to come through. Yeah, I mean, it's the whole thing is, and I suppose really I should kind of move the conversation away from skeptics and cynics, because that really doesn't serve this conversation really all that well. I do want to talk a little bit. Going through the course, because I'm just kind of looking at it, and we're looking at mediums, and there's a lot of different like types that you do in your lectures: automatic mediums, sensory mediums, physical mediums. One thing that I caught down here, and where did I lose it already? It was talking about seances, and I'm curious, what is it when we talk about seance, because I've seen it done a number of different ways. How does a seance work? What does that look like?
Well, a seance is we all have a type of, and I try and stay away from the terms energy, because that is another word that's overused and abused. But we have a low, I would call, voltage battery that the human organism carries with it, that the dead are trying to use on their side to manifest things on this side, whether it be communication or whatever. And just like putting several batteries together in a flashlight makes it bright, the same thing when you get people together and they connect, touching, whether it be thumb to pinky, and you're just around a table, that connection, that creating that battery, cumulatively allows the dead much easier access to do what it is that they are trying to do, whether it be physically manifest, whether it be physically move something like the table, or whether it be a planchette on a Ouija board. Being able to manifest things physically requires energy, and our combined effort, whether it's just touching, allows that to take place. Like an antenna, like an old TV rabbit ears, we'd put aluminum foil on my rabbit ears, allows that frequency and that information to come down a lot easier.
When I see seances, I mean, immediately I think of like what we see like in Victorian times of people sitting around a table holding hands and stuff. Does it work? Is that how it works? Because I've also gone to seances that they call them seances, but they're nothing, that they appear to be more of like a psychic gallery, which to me are two very different things. What do you think about this sitting around the table?
Well, seances, I mean, it's a French word. So that's the French parlors is where they got together. In Latin cultures, they call them misas. The style of it is really left up to the number of people that you have in the room. Okay. When you're in a room where it's around a table, having 7 people is the magic number. You can have 7 to, I think it's 13 tops around a table. And when you touch each other and you're complete that circuit, everything in that room suddenly becomes, charged, specifically the table itself. I've been to table tippings, which are seances, but the table itself weighs 300 pounds. It's round, made of oak, and it moves around like it was a balloon. It
Wow.
was very light, and it slides back and forth like a giant planchette on a Ouija board. And it literally will shift and twist and bounce like it's not even made of wood, like it's made of air, because the amount of energy that is being charged is allowing physics to be defied for all intents and purposes. It's crazy.
It is crazy. And you know what? I want to experience sitting around a table with 6 other people, and I want to hear the knocking on the wall. I want to feel that energy around there. And I think that that's something that's important. Is there anything that if I wanted to try that, bring in people that I know or that are, mediums and wanted to try it, is there anything that we should be very careful about trying to do something like that?
Well, it comes down to the relationship you have with the dead too.
Yeah.
You can't just open up a door and say, come on in, we'll talk to anybody. No, you need to specifically invoke higher level spirits.
Mm-hmm.
And in that too, it's almost a catch-22. Higher level spirits aren't all about moving things around. They're about the communication. But at the same time, they're good and intelligent spirits who will come and show you as proof this is actually a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody needs proof. And if you've just got psychics around the table and somebody's rattling off all kinds of bullshit, it's not going to convince anyone, and it's self-defeating, because that energy in of itself, when everybody around the table starts going, yeah, that's bullshit, it's dead. I mean, there's no reason to keep going.
Absolutely.
So, the dead will convince you.
Absolutely. Now, the question comes up, is using a Ouija board a seance?
Technically, yes. So you treat it like a seance. You don't, you open it, you close it. You don't open something and then walk away, because it stays open. Seances are opened and then they're closed. You invite them in and then you send them away and thank them in the process and say, this is done. And then, typically clapping your hands is the in a rhythmic, that's enough where the dead are like, okay, it's time to go. Like, okay, the lights in the bar came on.
Got it. Would you recommend that at investigations as well, where you're not doing a seance per se, but your investigation? I think one of the things that we always want to be concerned about is making sure that we're not getting followed home from these. Would you recommend that sort of ending as well? I mean, we say that you're not allowed to follow us, but to be literally, along those lines, would you recommend that?
Yeah, I would. Now, that being said, I've never actually been on an investigation. The typical paranormal investigation. This is one of the things that, Rob and Sarah, they promised to pop my cherry on that we're going to take me to an investigation.
Yep.
My whole thing has been coming in after the fact, doing other stuff. When people have bigger issues, like they have an attachment that follows them home and they can't get rid of it, I usually come in after the fact. So that's the thing. But you're right. That's exactly what should take place.
Now, a couple things here. D Hoot says, I'm reminded of Andrea Perron's mom at the seance with the Warrens. I'm curious to know, maybe everyone else knows exactly what that means. I don't, and please feel free to put in there what that means. But my question, Stacey, is that, you haven't done an investigation or anything, but you're a powerful medium. You're able to do remote viewing. You're able to do all sorts of different things. Do you look at what we do as an investigation? Do you look at that as, at least for what you're able to do, non-essential?
No. Learning is always essential. If you're going to an investigation for entertainment purposes, more power to you. It's you're gonna burned out really fast. But if you're an honest explorer I mean, that's what it's all about.
Mhm.
You know, going from one step to the next step to the next step, you have to start somewhere. And if the first step is going to an investigation and experiencing something for the first time, that, you know, oh shit moment,
Mhm.
that if that one moment is what you've been craving and you get it, that's just leads right into the next, because that's an adrenaline rush that you just become addicted to.
It's like you want to be able, Stacey, you want to be able to experience the possible movement of a door shutting or something on a location where everybody else is there, and maybe that energy from the everyone else there helps kind of coordinate however the night goes as well, to a certain extent.
Yeah, well, everybody's oh shit moment's going to be different. You
Yeah.
know, the door slams, you know, that's just, you know, one of them. You could hear something that nobody else heard, but you know it, and no one else can tell you different.
Mhm.
You know, you were in a room by yourself and someone whispered in your ear, you know, get out, and there was no one else in the room. That oh shit moment is priceless. You can't undo that. You can't unsee that or unhear it. You know it happened because it literally, your first thought was someone is standing right there. Your natural reaction was someone was standing right there and no one was there.
Yeah.
You can't explain those two things.
Absolutely. That makes sense. Now, originally, D Hoot said she talked about Andrea Perron's mom at the seance with the Warren. Then I asked, well, can you explain more? And I don't know if this happened in real life. I'm sure you all know much better than I do. I know this was in the film. She in her chair flew across the room. She was rendered unconscious. She hit her head. I mean, if that's real anyway, that's an extreme situation. When we're talking about seances, I can't imagine in just a general seance that actually is something that I think any of us would really have to worry about.
Right. In most of the time, whenever you're dealing with an object that moves, it is somehow connected to somebody who's actually touching something. Very rarely do you have an object that is, you know, the dishes in the kitchen while you're standing in the living room kind of stuff. Most of the time, it's like you're touching a table, or you're sitting in the chair, or you're, you know, touching something that is touching something, and that's when it moves. Because that juice, that voltage that we have is what is utilized to make something manifest. Almost never is it completely disconnected. Now, sometimes lightning does strike. I'll say that. But most of the time, 99.9% of the time, we're touching something that is touching something that they actually utilize. So.
And to follow up again, D Hoot says, I haven't seen the movie or read the book. This came from Andrea herself. I understand. I mean, but that's just a different situation anyway. So, and I would say that if anyone is running up against, like, they're going to be able to take part in some sort of seance, investigation, anything with any sort of nasty energy, and they know they're walking into that, to not do so unless you actually are trained to be in those situations. You know, and that's something else. And I'm not saying this is what D Hoot does, but it's something else that really frustrates me, Stacey, is people who are like they that thrill seeking, and kind of what you said earlier, the, you know, people who investigate for entertainment, like you said, good for them. But, you know, it's like, I find it's more of like kind of the thrill seeking rather than even just the entertainment part of it. And that's very dangerous.
Yeah, it can be. Thrill seekers are always doing stupid stuff for thrills.
Yep.
And understanding that what kind of personality you're dealing with whenever they're around, that's when you can pull back and say, all right, you can do your own thing. I'm just going to sit here and watch you do it. You know, because the most famous last words are, here, honey, watch this, you know, because it usually involves something very stupid.
Yeah, when you say that, it makes me think of those videos of those thrill seekers that are like somehow getting like to the top of the tallest skyscraper in Hong Kong or something, and they're doing the balancing on the edge, and it's like, well, this
yeah,
was a
they're doing
short life, wasn't it?
parkour from building top, and one of them just happens to miss once, and that's all it takes. Splat.
A small margin of error, that's for sure. Very, very small. Who it also says, so the spirit that says peanut butter without Rob saying it out loud is the one that follows him and has heard him say it at a previous location.
Probably. I mean, I don't know it for sure, but if you have a pattern of doing something, your spirits follow you around, and after a while they're like, oh, here we go again. Because they're people. They're not angelic beings necessarily. They were living once. They probably knew Rob personally at some point, and they're like, oh, here he goes, and they just say it because it's like, ah.
Yeah. Well, here's a question. As we're kind of edging towards the end here a little bit, but I wanted to ask your opinion on this. Mediumship, talking with the dead. What about talking to other entities, such as like any sort of aliens or anything like that? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, in remote viewing, we can do that. Verifiably, it becomes a little bit more risky or risque to go into, because in remote viewing, one of the favorite things is what I call enigma targets. They're mysterious things that everybody has questions about, things like aliens, Bigfoot, pyramids on Mars, things of that kind. You can remote view these things in a blind setting to where you don't know that's what the target is. And then you pull all this information down, you compile it together and say, this is what information I got. You compare that to actual target after the fact and determine whether or not you were on target or off target. Using that in a method for communicating with aliens, you can do that, but there's no way to actually verify after the fact that that's what took place. Because aliens aren't coming down saying, oh yeah, I got your message. They don't really do that. Some people claim they do later, abductees and things of that kind. But I don't like doing the enigma targets because I like to know what I hit was an actual thing.
There's a point of reference, right?
Right. I don't want to bullshit myself saying that, I talked to aliens when I have no clue whether or not I actually did. This is the information I got. This is how I did it. This is, the process that is consistent with all of the other stuff. But in the end, I still don't know because I can't verify the communication. I can't verify from the aliens themselves whether or not it actually took place. So the enigma targets, I shy away from it, but a lot of remote viewers use it on a regular basis. Stephen Greer, for example, that's his go-to. More power to him.
And I would assume that you would want to tell people, first of all, if if they're interested in mediumship, they haven't done a whole lot of it, don't jump to there. Don't start there. Start doing other things that are, like you would say, and I like that idea of like kind of the point of reference, sort of like that you are able to understand.
Right. Well, that's part of the learning process too. It's the verification. Instant verification is positive affirmation. Our brain learns from positive and negative affirmation. If we have that open-ended to where you don't really know whether or not it actually got it or was, affirmed, you don't learn it. It doesn't, that pathway doesn't get created, and that habit or mental pathway does not work right. So if you have, in remote viewing specifically, it is a very rigid format for creating positive affirmation of your session. You did all of this, you sensed it, you got it all, and then in the end, it was correct. Those two things, once they link, that's a learned pathway. So you remember how to do it again the next time. So, and the next time it gets a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And after a while, the data that comes through it's like drinking out of a fire hose. You get so much that you don't even know what to do with it all. because your brain is actually accepting it for what it is. It's real data. That's part of the learning process, and doing it with the dead is very, very similar. So
now, when I'm looking at the site on Udemy for the Talking to Dead Basics of Spirit Communication, you do say requirements. You should have already completed the course Remote Viewing Basics, and I'm curious why that is.
Just for the terminology.
Okay.
Becoming a remote viewer, the basics, and a medium are so similar, but in mediumship, because it's been around for hundreds of years, in the term mediumship, in the 1800s, they had the parlors and different things of that kind. It has evolved and changed in its terminology and how people view it so drastically from decade to decade that you can't actually teach it without having to go back and teach all of the verbiage that goes with it.
Sure.
Remote viewing cuts through a lot of that because we can show you, like I was saying before, through positive affirmation, these things are linked. You do this way, this is mediumship, does it this way, but it's the same thing. Like I was saying with Rob at the beginning of the show, with AOLs, which stands for analytical overlay. In paranormal hunting, they call it matrixing.
Yep.
Where your brain will create something that it seems to see that is already a pattern that you have in your mind, like a face. It sees faces. That's matrixing. Your brain is hardwired to do that. Doesn't mean there was a face there. It means your brain created that imagery because it wants to please you, and you want to see a face. So it creates one. That's AOL, analytical overlay. Real data is hidden inside that. It's not that. It's you are getting bits and pieces of information, tiny fractions of information, and your brain pieces it all together very, very quickly within 3 seconds and gives you an image that it thinks you want.
Sure.
And the dead will often use that as a form of communication. So understanding the difference between an AOL and the dead speaking to you, you're working on the same level. So it's that's the only reason for it, is to get that syntax in teaching those two courses.
That makes sense. Now, I'm curious about what you think of this. Carolina says, she says two things, universal download for the gifted one. And then she says, some are just chosen and not learned.
I don't think people are chosen necessarily.
Yeah.
If they're chosen, it's because they have an aptitude. They, refuse to give up through learned response as a child, or they were chosen because they experienced something traumatic, and now somebody on the other side is put them under their wing.
Yeah.
Somebody who's been abused as a child often has many, many protecting guides as they grow up. But it's not really chosen. It's more or less their victim status is raised up higher because they're scarred. So.
Well, and I think, if there's any sort of choosing, sometimes I feel like it's like we choose to finally listen to what's happening inside of us.
Yeah. I mean, like I said before, there are a lot of people that walk around with no internal voice.
Right.
I can't imagine that. That would be mind-numbingly crazy of not having an internal voice. But there are a lot of people that walk around that way. They choose not to think within themselves or think, what's going on in their own head at that moment. That's just crazy to me. But, there are some people that do. Science has actually proven that.
Right. D Hoot had one quick question. Their question was, is the veil thinner during a total eclipse?
I don't really know. I haven't had many total eclipses in my life. most of the stuff with the total eclipse is, they're omens, bad omens of things that, are going to take place. The Bible is chock full of eclipses that have happened that way. Ancient Egypt was that way too.
Mhm.
I mean, the very goddess or god status of Isis happened during a total eclipse. In the mythology of Isis, she was a mortal woman at one point, and she was actually being prosecuted as a prostitute. It was illegal to be a prostitute in ancient Egypt, and she was being prosecuted, and she was on the stand, and she was being falsely accused, and she said that if you do not let me go, I will hold the sun in darkness for 3 days. And as she was on the stand, a total eclipse happened, and apparently it was for 3 days. And at that point, they not only let her go, they deemed her a goddess, and that's where she initially got that status.
Interesting.
According to the scrolls. So
well, and I don't know how real this is, because this is based off of a TV show. That's where I learned my history from, where that like in Mexico, when they would back in the 1500s or whatever, and they would sacrifice other people, and that would bring like rain or whatever. Right. That was also because the people who ran those civilizations, they were able to know, like, based on what I guess what I would consider their science, that they would know that this is a good chance that this will happen, or an eclipse of some kind will happen, because they've been mapping stuff in their own civilization. Do you ever hear about that, where it's like that sort of thing, the eclipse is kind of pushed into favor of people who know more than the rest of, say, their civilization, where they're kind of, maybe in a sense, kind of pulling one over on them?
Right. Well, there's events like astral events were a big thing. It was the elites were the ones that had all of that knowledge. It was not only this calendar, but it also, to them, foretold the rise and fall of their own empires. So these things were very important to the elite. They wanted to know not only, what was going to happen, but how long they would actually stay in power, because that's what it's all about anyway, is staying in power.
Totally.
100%. The Mayans had their own form of democratic process, when it came to the human sacrifices, that if women and children were still very sacred. They were the most innocent, most holy things in society. And if they were the ones that were being sacrificed, that wasn't taken for granted at all. If after that sacrifice, bad things, started to happen or didn't stop happening, like if there was a lot of natural events that were destroying things and killing their crops and things of that kind, and the sacrifices weren't working, they went straight to the guy who was running things. His head was the next on the chopping block. So they were very sensitive to the idea of, wanting to know how their empire would continue on. So
very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's like it's still happening today in its own way, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but the elites always seem to forget that everything is temporary. They seem to think that they have an absolute monopoly on not only the future but the whole world. They really don't.
It's so true. It's sad. I don't know why I'm laughing. I don't know why I'm laughing, because it's actually very sad.
Eventually, they roll out the guillotines. The elite always find out the guillotines have wheels, and they roll them out. So it's the hubris is always their own undoing.
Absolutely. So once again, if you haven't done so, please check out Professor Stacey's his courses. We're talking tonight about the Talking Dead Basic of Spirit Communication on Udemy. Go to udemy.com. We're gonna put a close to tonight's conversation, if that's all right with you, Professor Stacey.
That's fine. You got places to be. I am just here for, the service of others.
Absolutely. And then you're gonna be back in 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Do you know what you're going to be talking about then yet, or is that?
I have no idea. D Hoot's the one that throws out a lot of the ideas that we run with here, so I'm sure she'll think of something.
Absolutely. And if I may just kind of promote myself for a quick second, if you are interested, I'm on 5 nights a week on Get Haunted, and also on AM 950 GhostBox Radio at 11:05 Eastern Time, 10:05 Central Time. Professor Stacey, this was thank you so much for allowing me into your world for a little bit tonight.
Oh, well, thank you for doing this. It's really a pleasure talking to you for the first time, because I've seen your show, and I'm like, one of these days I'm gonna, get this guy, and I didn't know you were gonna be on my show, so that's very, very cool.
Well, we can turn it around and get you on mine. Let's talk about get you on in May. So
anytime you want, just let me know.
Will do. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. Professor Stacey will be back on here 2 Thursdays from now. This was a real pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me in. We'll take care, everyone. Have a good night.
See ya. Peace. All right. I guess that's it. No, we're still live. All right.